I used to believe I was different, that I was stronger than temptation, that no matter how lonely I felt, no matter how unseen I became, I would never be that woman, the one who betrays everything she stands for. But let me tell you something, desire doesn't knock. It doesn't ask permission. It seeps into the cracks of your life so quietly, so effortlessly, that by the time you realize it's there, it has already taken root. And that's exactly what happened to me. It started with a glance. A simple, fleeting moment. His eyes met mine, and I should have looked away. I should have. But I didn't. I had been raised to know better, to lower my gaze, to guard my heart. But in that house, in those stolen moments, my faith, my morals, my discipline, they all started slipping through my fingers. One question kept circling in my mind: what if this was meant to happen? What if fate had placed me here for a reason? I tried to fight it. I told myself it was nothing. Just a kind employer. Just a polite smile. Just harmless words exchanged in passing. But deep down I knew. I knew the moment his voice softened when he spoke to me. I knew when his presence lingered longer than it should. I knew when he looked at me like I was something more. At first, I convinced myself it was all in my head, that I was imagining it. But I wasn't. And once I finally let myself admit the truth, it was already too late. If you think you know how this ends, trust me, you don't. I was always the woman who kept her distance. The one who avoided distractions, who followed the rules, who did everything by the book. My faith was my guide, my shield. I believed in discipline, in self-control. And for the longest time, that was enough. Until it wasn't. At first, I didn't notice it. The small moments. The way my heart reacted when he walked into the room. The warmth in his voice when he asked how my day was. The way he lingered just a second too long when handing me a cup of tea. It was nothing. I told myself it was nothing. But I was lying. I had spent my life believing that temptation was something obvious, something you could see coming from a mile away. But that's not how it happens. It starts quietly, subtly. Like a whisper you don't even realize you're hearing. I told myself I was imagining it. That Hassan was just kind. That he treated everyone this way. But deep down, I knew better. I knew because his kindness felt different. Because when he spoke to me, there was something in his eyes, something I had never seen in a married man before. He wasn't unhappy, but he wasn't happy either. His wife, Aisha, was beautiful, elegant, accomplished. But she was always somewhere else. Her career, her meetings, her charities, they came first. He didn't say it, but I could see it. And one evening, I heard it. It was late. The kids had gone to bed, and I was finishing up some lesson plans in the study. He walked in, looking tired. He leaned against the desk and sighed. And then, without thinking, he told me, "You know, sometimes I feel like I don't exist in my own home." I looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" He gave a small, sad smile. "Nothing. Forget it." But I didn't forget it. Because that was the first time I saw it, the loneliness in his eyes. And that's when it started. I don't know if it was intentional, or if it just happened, but from that night on, something shifted. Our conversations became longer. Deeper. He started sharing things with me, his struggles balancing work and fatherhood, his childhood stories, his dreams for the future. And I listened. I really listened. And maybe that's what made the difference. Because when someone finally sees you after you've spent years being invisible, it does something to you. I told myself it was admiration. Nothing more. I wasn't breaking any rules. I wasn't crossing any lines. But my heart knew better. Because every time he spoke to me, I wanted more. Every time he laughed, I felt something inside me stir. And every moment I spent with him pulled me in deeper. I should have left. I should have set boundaries. I should have done something. But I didn't. Because once the fire is lit, you don't realize how close you are to the flames, until you're already burning. It happens so easily, so naturally, that I almost convinced myself it wasn't happening at all. One evening, after tutoring, I was in the kitchen, preparing tea. The house was quiet, the children asleep, and the only sound was the gentle clinking of the spoon against the cup. I was alone, until I wasn't. I felt him before I saw him. Hassan walked in, his presence filling the space in a way I could no longer ignore. He stood close, closer than usual. I should have stepped away. I should have created distance. But I didn't. He reached past me to grab a glass, his arm grazing mine. A touch so light, so brief, yet it sent something sharp and electric through my skin. I froze. And so did he. There was a pause, thick with unspoken words. I turned my head slightly, and our eyes met. That was the moment. The moment where everything could have ended. Where I could have smiled politely, excused myself, walked away. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I didn't see a married man. I didn't see the father of 2 children. I didn't see the husband of a woman who trusted me. I saw the way his breathing changed. I saw the way his eyes flickered, hesitation, curiosity, longing. And I saw something else. He wanted me. And instead of being horrified, instead of pulling away, I wanted him to. That night, nothing happened. Not yet. But something had shifted. A door had opened, even if neither of us had the courage to step through it. But it wasn't long before we did. The conversations that were once casual became something else. Longer. Deeper. More personal. He started asking questions about me, about my childhood, my dreams, and my thoughts on things that had nothing to do with the children I was tutoring. He wanted to know me. And I let him. I told myself it was harmless, that it was just conversation. But his voice lingered in my mind long after I left the house. His compliments became more personal. "You have a beautiful way of explaining things," he said one evening. "You make everything seem so warm." It was just words. And yet, it wasn't. Because when he said it, his voice was softer. Because when he said it, his eyes never left mine. And I started to anticipate these moments. I would wake up wondering what he would say to me that day. What story he would share. What glance we might steal when no one was looking. It was intoxicating. And terrifying. I tried to fight it. I told myself it was nothing. That I was imagining things. That I was still in control. But control is an illusion. And once a fire is lit, it only takes one moment to let it burn. That moment came on a stormy night. The rain poured hard against the pavement as I stepped outside, my keys in my hand, ready to leave. I heard his footsteps behind me before I heard his voice. "Miriam." I turned. He was standing at the doorway, his shirt slightly unbuttoned, and his expression unreadable. He hesitated. And then softly, almost too softly, I heard it. "Stay." A single word. A single plea. I should have said no. I should have walked away. But I didn't. Because in that moment, I wasn't thinking about right or wrong. I wasn't thinking about faith, about consequences, about the woman I was supposed to be. I was thinking about the way he was looking at me. I was thinking about the way my heart was pounding. I was thinking about how, for the first time in a long time, I wanted something. I wanted him. I stepped forward. I walked back inside. And the door closed behind me. I knew it was wrong. I knew I was making a mistake. But at that moment, nothing else mattered. It didn't happen all at once. It wasn't a single night of regret or a single moment of weakness. No, what we had was something that grew in the shadows, something that stretched across stolen glances, whispered conversations, and touches that lingered too long. At first, it was just an affair of the mind. Words exchanged in quiet rooms, secrets passed between us like something sacred. But the more we stole these moments, the more we craved them. It wasn't enough to talk anymore. It wasn't enough to wonder. We needed more. We found ways. Before the children woke up. When Aisha was away at meetings. Between the gaps in our separate lives, we carved out a world of our own. A world that didn't exist on paper, that no one could see, but a world that became more real than anything else. He would find me in the study, close the door behind him, and suddenly the air would change. His hand would brush against mine, and I would forget who I was supposed to be. My name, my morals, my faith, all of it blurred. There was only him. Only this. And once we had tasted that, there was no turning back. I told myself I hated it, the way my heart raced when we were nearly caught, the way I would smooth my clothes and step out of a room as if nothing had happened, knowing full well what I had just done. I told myself the fear of discovery should be enough to stop me. But it wasn't. The risk became part of the addiction. I would wake up in the morning, perform my ablution, and stand in prayer. My forehead pressed to the ground, my lips forming whispered pleas for forgiveness. Ya Allah, forgive me. And then, hours later, I would go back to him. Again and again. And each time, the guilt grew fainter. The fear became excitement. I knew what I was doing. I knew what it meant. But there was something intoxicating about knowing we were balancing on the edge of destruction and still choosing to fall. He made me feel alive. And for the first time, that feeling was worth more than my faith. I saw the way he looked at me, like I was something fragile, something precious. When I spoke, he listened. When I laughed, he held on to the sound like it was the last thing keeping him breathing. And I wondered, was this what love was supposed to feel like? Was this what Aisha had lost? Because with her, he was different. Distant. Cold. He barely looked at her, barely spoke unless it was about logistics, about the children, about their public image. They were a picture-perfect couple, the kind you see in magazines, beautiful, successful, and untouchable. But behind closed doors, there was nothing left between them. And I was the only thing that made him feel again. I convinced myself that this meant something. That I was different. That I wasn't just a distraction. I wanted to believe it. But lies have a way of unraveling. And no matter how careful we were, the cracks had begun to show. The children noticed first. Omar, barely 6, looked up at me one evening and asked, "Why does Baba smile at you more than Mama?" I froze. I told myself it was harmless. That children saw things differently. That he didn't understand. But deep down I knew. And then, there was Aisha. She had always been too busy to notice. Too consumed with her perfect world, her career, her social circles. But now, she was watching. She started asking questions, small ones at first. Have you been spending more time with Hassan? Did he mention where he went this afternoon? You seem comfortable here. I felt the walls closing in. I told myself I would end it. That I would walk away before we destroyed everything. But every time I tried, he would find me. He would reach for my hand, whisper my name, look at me like I was the only thing keeping him from drowning. I can't lose you. And just like that, I was his again. Because what we had was a fire, and I was too far gone to pull myself from the flames. I didn't know it yet, but we were running out of time. Because secrets don't stay secrets forever. And ours was about to come crashing down. I should have known it wouldn't last. I should have known that no matter how careful we were, no matter how many times we told ourselves we were in control, secrets don't stay buried forever. I just never thought it would happen like this. It was late. The house was quiet. The children were asleep. Aisha was supposed to be out at an event, another one of her endless commitments, another night where she played the role of the perfect wife to the world while her husband was somewhere else, with someone else. With me. Hassan's hand rested on my waist, his breath warm against my skin as he whispered something I didn't even hear because in that moment, I wasn't thinking. I wasn't praying. I wasn't worrying. I was his. And then the air shifted. A sound. A presence. I turned. And there she was. Standing in the doorway. Her eyes frozen. Her lips slightly parted. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't demand explanations. She just stood there, her body rigid, her face unreadable, except for her eyes. Eyes that weren't just looking at me. They were seeing me for what I was. A betrayal in human form. The silence was unbearable. Hassan stepped back, his hand falling away from me like he had just realized it was burning him. For the first time, he looked guilty. And Aisha? She looked gone. Something inside her had shattered, but she didn't let it show. She swallowed, took a breath, and then whispered the only word that mattered. Get out. Her voice wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was worse. It was empty. Hassan opened his mouth like he wanted to say something. Maybe to her. Maybe to me. But no words came. And then he just stopped trying. I should have begged for forgiveness. I should have fallen to my knees, apologized for ruining her home, for breaking the trust she had placed in me, for betraying the woman who had opened her doors to me without hesitation. But I didn't move. Because as much as I hated myself in that moment, as much as I wanted to undo what I had done, there was something else inside me. Something terrifying. I didn't regret him. I regretted the pain I had caused. I regretted the destruction. I regretted the look in Aisha's eyes, the weight of knowing her world had just collapsed because of me. But I didn't regret him. And that was the worst part of all. Aisha turned to me, her expression unreadable, and said it again. Leave. This time, I moved. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain. What could I say? That I never meant for this to happen? That I wished things were different? That I loved her husband? None of it would matter. I picked up my bag with shaking hands, walked past her without another word, and as I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a punishment. But the worst part? Hossein didn't follow. He didn't come after me. He didn't fight for me. He didn't fight for her either. He just stood there, silent, letting it happen. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't his choice. I was just his escape. And now? He had nowhere left to run. I didn't pack everything. I didn't need to. I left behind books, clothes, things that once mattered but now felt insignificant. When I walked out of that house, I knew I wasn't coming back. I knew there was no version of this story where I got to stay. But the hardest part wasn't leaving. The hardest part was knowing that my absence wouldn't go unnoticed. The next morning, Omar would wake up, rub the sleep from his eyes, and search for me. He would run to the study, peek into the kitchen, and when he didn't find me, he would turn to his father with confusion laced in his small voice. Where's Miriam? The weight of those words would land like a stone in Hassan's chest. When is she coming back? And Hossein would have no answer. Because I wasn't. And he knew it. I can picture it, the way Omar's face would fall when no one gave him the answer he wanted, the way Dahlia would quietly reach for her mother's hand, sensing that something had shifted, something had cracked. Children don't always understand betrayal, but they feel it. And in that house, betrayal hung in the air like perfume. Aisha didn't waste time. There was no screaming, no grand confrontation, no desperate attempts to salvage what was already broken. She simply filed the papers. Hossein didn't fight it. He signed without protest, without argument, as if he had expected this all along. Maybe he had. Maybe he had known, deep down, that our affair was never just a mistake. That it was a symptom of something deeper, something unfixable. But knowing didn't make it easier. Because I watched, helplessly, as a family unraveled. A marriage ended. A home that once felt untouchable fell apart, brick by brick, and I was the wrecking ball. I wasn't there when Aisha told the children. But I imagined it. I imagined the way she would sit them down, her voice steady but cold, explaining in words simple enough for them to understand. Baba and I won't be living together anymore. No, it's not your fault. Things change. But what she wouldn't say, what she would never say, was that I was the reason. And yet, they would feel it. Even if they didn't know my name anymore, even if my presence faded into something unspoken, my shadow would always be there. A ghost in the walls of a broken home. I lost everything. My job. My home. The small moments of laughter with Omar and Dahlia. The warm tea in the evenings. The quiet life I had built within those walls. And strangely, I didn't regret the affair. I only regretted that it had to end. Because as much as I ruined, as much as I destroyed, there was one thing I couldn't deny. For the first time in my life, I had felt something real. And that feeling was worth everything. Even if, in the end, I had nothing left to show for it. I've had time to think. To sit in the silence of my own choices, to let the weight of everything settle into my bones. I've replayed every moment in my head, traced back every step I took, every look I held too long, every touch I should have resisted. And after all that, I've realized something. I don't regret it. I regret the pain I caused, the lives I fractured, the innocence I stole from a family that never saw me as a threat. But the affair itself? The way it made me feel? I don't regret that. Because for the first time in my life, I felt alive. Maybe that's why I did it. Maybe it wasn't just about Hossein. Maybe it wasn't just about love or desire or loneliness. Maybe it was about something deeper, something I didn't even realize I was missing until it was too late. I had spent so long being careful, doing what was expected, walking the straight path without ever once looking at what lay beyond it. And then suddenly, I wasn't just existing. I was living. But some things aren't meant to last. Some fires aren't meant to keep burning. Some stories don't get happy endings. I know that now. But tell me, have you ever wanted something so badly that you risked everything for it? Have you ever made a choice knowing it would destroy you but still took the step anyway? Maybe this isn't just my story. Maybe it's yours too. Maybe you felt it, that moment where your heart wants what it shouldn't, where the temptation is stronger than the fear, where the thought of never knowing is more unbearable than the consequences of finding out. And if you have, then you understand why I did what I did. If this story speaks to you, if you've ever stood at the edge of a decision that could change everything, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes, the biggest regret isn't the betrayal. It's never knowing what it feels like to be truly wanted.